Welcome, everyone. A few weeks ago, I had an incredible conversation with 2X's own CFO, Brandon Sullivan. And that conversation was about how CMOs can build a stronger partnership with their finance peers. The interest in that episode just floored us. And so we thought we would continue that conversation today, but with a fresh perspective from another amazing CFO who has firsthand experience not just transforming finance functions through the use of outsourcing and innovating their operating model, also has experience and has witnessed marketers that have leveraged the same outsourcing strategy to do the same for marketing. Since marketing leaders are being pushed every day to scale marketing impact without increasing costs, I thought you'd appreciate hearing what he's learned about solving the same problem. Yeah. So let's welcome Rich Carroll to the show. Rich is a longtime CFO. He's a financial strategist and a principal at Maximus Partners. He helps mid-market companies modernize and scale finance functions. He's also been a very strong advocate for the offshore managed services model, not just in finance, but across business functions like marketing. In fact, he's a founding board member at 2X, so he's witnessed the power of this model when applied to marketing. Rich, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure.
Maybe talk a little bit about your experience that led to this conversation today?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. So I've spent the past 25 years in corporate finance before being one of the founders of Maximus, co-founder. And really my path has been more on the strategic finance and FP&A side of the finance function that led up to the CFO role. And so I've always had kind of a hand in the go-to-market world, whether it was marketing or sales metrics and such. And a lot of that is operational support when it comes to financial reporting and such, KPI measurement, data and analytics, and all those types of things. And through my journey, I've been lucky enough to work with some very innovative and fantastic CMOs. And I think some of the best ones look a little bit different in terms of the way that they approach the office of the CMO and the way that they look at where they can get scale and where they can maximize things. Very heavy on data analytics, very heavy on forward-looking metrics, but they also realize that they need to get more for the power of a buck internally. They have limited budgets. And the best ones that I've worked for, and you mentioned me being right there at the cusp of the founding of 2X, and Dominic Colsante was one of them, Jeff Vail was one of them. But they were fantastic in the way that they would leverage the amount of budget that they were given to get the same, if not more, value out of their team through just, maximizing the value and the hours associated with the structure that they have and the way that they design it.
I love the way you position that, getting more from the money that they've received. I've heard that comment a few times this week. How do I make my money work harder
Right.
for me, my team, and my organization? Which is really, at the end of the day, that's why marketing leaders can learn from the finance playbook that you've, kind of developed and perfected through the years. What I thought, where we could potentially get started, is really just thinking through, lessons that marketing can take from what you've learned through the years. So what are when you think about if you could start it all over again, what are the things you would do again? Or perhaps lessons might change the way you think about that
Yeah. I mean,
going forward.
marketing is the whole idea behind marketing. This is, a finance guy's point of view on it is to drive more sales, right? Just real simple. When to
Right.
drive more sales, you're trying to drive more volume and more opportunities. And so somebody that's really data focused and is all about driving that top line funnel is designing their marketing function to do so. So they're trying to drive as many opportunities through. And the way to do that is to use your budget more efficiently, and to use your budget more efficiently is to have the same amount of people doing the same amount of activity, I should say it a different way, to have more people doing more activity for the same price. And so that's really why the outsourcing model can be so effective. If you can have the same quality and you have 10 people in the US, but all of a sudden you can offshore them, you have 20. Now you
Yeah.
just double the amount of output that you're able to drive through the top of the funnel.
When you first started using this model, when you first started thinking about, I'm going to innovate my operating model, I'm going to leverage outsourcing. I'm going to outsource portions of my finance
Yep.
function, and I'm going to do so in an offshore model. What challenges did you face? Did you face challenge
Yeah.
in getting
Yeah.
buy-in from your peers or maybe even from your own leadership team? Kind of what did you face and how did you manage through that?
Well, everyone has a horror story, right? And a lot of the
Yeah.
horror stories are because they've gone to different countries or different jurisdictions, then they haven't gotten the same level of quality that you can actually get from, the countries that 2X is set up in. You have heavy Western educated people, you have high English proficiency, you have a dedication to actually dedicating and driving the same level of consistency and operationality through the function that you would have with U.S. employees. So if you can get that, the same exact quality, but move it offshore at, half, if not, even, significantly greater savings than just 50%, you're crazy not to. But the problem is it's a lot of convincing internal because everyone has seen these things go awry, where they try to set it up themselves or they just plugged in somewhere and it's, somebody's not dedicated, you're sharing resources. It just can be a little bit of a strain on the organization and it pushes people away from it.
Yeah. So some of I think what I just heard you say was that first you need to, share. There are certain geographies that have strong English proficiency.
Yep.
There are certain geographies that sometimes will stretch and work US hours.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then there are models that would allow for dedicated embedded resources, people that act like true members of your team. And how do you present those options internally in such a way that doesn't require so much convincing? Anyway, so, how do you find those partners? And then how do you go ahead and package it internally to get there faster?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you package it internally, part of it is that this isn't really a vendor. This is an extension of your
Right.
team, which I think is critically important to have that viewpoint. Because if you go upstream and work with some of the larger companies, they may have an offshore center. And those people are part of the team. And if you're a company that's growing and you don't position it that way, you're basically saying, well, the company, this is just another vendor. And so when there's
Right.
another vendor, budget comes up, it's a big line in the P&L, it's a big line in the budget. Why are we spending so much with this outsourced company? They don't realize it's part of the team. If it's part of the team, it's flowing through essentially the org chart and you're looking at it and you're like, well, no, those people are part of the team. That's so-and-so that you work with on a day in, day out basis. And they're like, oh, that's a real person. That's right. Oh, and I do the math on it. That's way cheaper than everybody else I have in this marketing function. And it creates this cycle where people move faster to want to adopt and push more processes overseas.
When you and I first connected, there was an aha moment in that conversation on this point where I realized that I actually didn't handle things the best way when I had attempted to get buy-in from my CFO and my peers about outsourcing part of the marketing function. I indirectly or just unintentionally made it harder on myself. And I actually talked to the CFO that I was going to reduce my personnel spend, showed that personnel savings, showed this smaller org chart. But then separately, when I presented the complete budget, I ended up dealing with concerns or objections around having such a large line item in the non-personnel spend and not connecting the dots between the vendor and
Mhm.
the shift in the operating model. That was just eye-opening in a way. I hadn't connected the dots before. I thought that perhaps the CFO would appreciate that I achieved these personnel savings and certainly with a smaller organization, more flexible, nimble. It's not so inflexible should things that the organization dynamics change, and that presenting this line item in the non-personnel uh, that seemed flexible, it seemed manageable. Tell me a little bit about if you have advice for marketers on how to think about even just that presentation. That was just eye-opening to me.
Yeah.
I'd love to
Yeah. I
let's
mean,
paint that picture for the
right.
marketer
Yeah.
because clearly I messed it up twice.
Right. Right.
And I, if anything, marketing haters, if you're listening, don't do what I did. It made my job so much harder to manage through that.
Yeah. No, it's a
So,
great point. I mean, headcount to me is just, it's a metric, right? And
right.
so when you're having a conversation with the CFO and you're like, I'm going to cut my heads by 100. Well, then I assume it's 100
Yeah.
times whatever you're going to save. There shouldn't be anything going up on the other side. And so what's happening in that is it's just kind of a shell game that you're going to cut the 100 and then stick it down under the vendor spend line for outsourcing. What I would prefer to
Right.
see, which I think is more powerful, which goes back to what you're really doing, is it's not 100. We're keeping the 100. We're carving this out in the org chart and it's staying there. It's the same people, it's the same activity. But what's happening is the cost has dropped significantly. And I want to be able to see that every year versus it getting all slammed together in one enormous vendor bucket for a vendor spend that's running through the P&L that's harder to budget. I can't see, I don't see value. It looks like it could be anything, sitting in that vendor spend bucket.
Right. Right. It's super helpful. Basically, the experience I had was I went through that process, found I was defending those items. Then eventually I had to create multiple versions of org charts
Mm-hmm.
that showed in-house, outsource, how these things work. Then I started, developing these operating model visuals about how the work would flow and how we'd support 24/5, follow the sun, but never really connected those dots so clearly simply because I felt like I was solving two different problems.
Right.
Anyway, so even just that simple visual and really being able to tell that story in a way that's just easier to understand, I have to imagine diffuses objections before they even happen.
Well, that's where it starts, right? And then the other part of it is there's this process that goes through finance and all organizations, which is annual budgeting. And so that first time you
Right.
have that discussion, that next year, hopefully the same CFO is there. Sometimes they're not. And the year after, same type of situation. So all of a sudden, they don't know the whole evolution. But if you continue to show that org chart and show that it's made up of people that are offshore, it has a different impact on the discussions.
That's now recognizing that outsourcing or offshoring models aren't only just about cost savings.
Right.
In many cases, it could be about performance or scalability. When you think about how you measure the return on outsourcing, the return on that decision, like how do you think about that and what should CMOs take away from that and apply to the way that they report on marketing's performance and
Right.
impact and
Yeah, and I go
effectiveness? Like,
back
how do you think about the ROI of outsourcing?
Yeah, I go back to some of the metrics that I was talking about before in terms of just increasing the pipeline and increasing the throughput from marketing qualified leads. And
Yeah.
if you can take the same amount of people, let's say use that 100 example, let's just say the whole organization's 100, and you take 50 and you move them offshore, and you still have 100, but now you have them in a center that has access to all different kinds of tools and access to all different kinds of people. So it's almost like this AI tool of this. It's a learning environment that's moving very fast. And now your marketing
Right.
qualified leads, because you've implemented that structure next year, increased by 30%. I mean, you just took the same amount of people, dropped the cost significantly, and took up the marketing qualified leads. Your cost of leads dropped significantly. Those are the things that are really powerful. That's where I like to get excited from a CFO standpoint. When I plug in, I can start to work with my FP&A team to measure those metrics, because that's where
Yeah.
you see a real game changer in terms of being able to accelerate growth.
One of the lessons I learned when using this model, I was at Faro Technologies. And after about a year and a half of leveraging this model, what we noticed was simultaneously reduced costs, but we did see more flow into the pipeline, more revenue impact from the marketing spend. We also saw, faster velocity, and it was the one first real example where you could see driving reduction in costs didn't mean that you had to sacrifice an increase in impact and simultaneously. Normally, marketers find themselves with their backs against the wall and they have to make a decision. I've got a budget cut, I've got to reduce it. So now I've got to reset expectations for the impact that we can have. And I don't know of any other model or investment decision a marketer can make that will simultaneously deliver both of those performance impacts. So it's very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I
And
agree.
since you mentioned it,
Yeah.
you mentioned the word AI.
Yes.
I know you see AI as a game changer for both finance and marketing. In our last conversation, though, you mentioned a couple of things around, hey, AI could be a game changer, but you've got to be, you've got to get your hands around or get your house in order around your processes before you can really effectively apply AI, uh,
Right.
to have a measurable impact. Tell me a little bit about whether that's in the context of finance or marketing. I think that's one piece that people are missing, right? They can go out and invest in AI technologies. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to have the impact and that you'll get that ROI. So, what are your thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah. I mean, everyone has their own opinions on AI. I think obviously it's a game changer. It's here. You can see it starting to weave through everything and have tremendous impact. But I do think back to what you had mentioned, which I think is really powerful, is it's almost like a step process in my mind in terms of you need to you need to move things into a structured, process oriented model. And there's no better model than an outsourcing model to do that before you can leverage AI. AI can work on an unstructured environment where there's lots of people, but it's going to spit out the wrong answers. If you can take your
Right.
processes and put them all together inside of an outsourced model and go through that process of migrating things and streamlining things, then all of a sudden you can start to leverage all the AI that you need to leverage. So I think it's a perfect kind of bridge to getting there because it forces you to do all those process things that you need to do in terms of structuring data, structuring process, and defining roles and responsibilities, all those types of things.
So, viewing outsourcing as a way to get your house in order
Yeah,
so that you can then apply AI to accelerate your workflows,
absolutely.
drive bigger impact.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. I
Yeah. I
love
mean, we're going
the
through it right.
combination of the two.
We're going through it right now with a couple of customers because they have this loose process when it comes to finance, the same type of thing. And by our teams pushing it all together and move it offshore and standardizing all of the processes, now they can leverage some of those AI tools. But you have to go through that first evolution.
Agreed. Agreed. So, just on the topic of budget and operational changes, marketer makes a decision, create my operating model. I'm going to outsource some of my workflows to drive cost efficiencies. Now, how would you like them? Should there be a shift in the market and they've got to make a rapid pivot in some way, whether that's scale up to meet a competitive demand in the marketplace or a global pandemic happens and
Yeah.
they've got to make different decisions. How would you want them to approach you? How would you want the CMO to approach you as a CFO to gain buy-in for whatever those shifts need to be, whether that's they need more funding or they need to shift things significantly from, let's say, one portion of their budget to another that may or may not be as flexible? Like, how would you like them to approach you in those moments?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a very frank person in terms of like, I just want to have the conversation right up front. And I'm happy to work with the CMO to build out a lot of those things and start to whiteboard some of the different solutions. Doesn't need to be done in a vacuum. There's people on
Yeah.
the finance team that are true business partners, and that's the way you design a very successful finance function is a business partnership
Oh,
model. And if you can plug them in, it's never sneaking up on you because you've been talking about it on a regular basis and you've been monitoring some of the metrics and you can see it already. And so there's a lot of value that finance CFO and CMO or CMO and maybe a specific business partner that you have assigned from an FP&A function that they can start to build as they go. So it never really truly sneaks up.
agreed. Agreed. I have had the luxury of having great HR and finance business partners through the years in my roles, but I've since learned that not every CMO and or marketing team has had the benefit of a finance business partner, or at least one that shows up that way. Do you have advice for how a newly hired marketer might establish that relationship in such a way that kind of sets them both up for success going forward?
Yeah, it's a great point. Not all finance functions are set up, or HR functions are set up with business partnership model. I think they all should, but I think there's
Yeah.
also something that should come out of that chief marketing officer or VP of market or whoever's leading the marketing function to go back and try to educate and create the connection, which is we don't
Yeah.
have the strong FP&A function. I would really like a business partner that can help me through the operational review process, through the KPI reporting, through the dashboard reporting, to help me figure out a way to tie this back into the budget so that you have better lens into the marketing impact. If you start to get pushback, then, I think it would be wise if you have the budget for it to put your own analyst on your team and try and build
Yeah.
that first. Because what will happen is the CFO will start to see the metrics and the analysis that's coming out of the marketing function. They may eventually start to fold it into their team, but it will create this almost this competitiveness or this data sharing that will put a very positive lens on what's happening in the marketing function and how you're able to prove out a lot of the marketing spend in terms of real opportunities and wins, essentially, that you're able to drive back through the P&L.
I love that suggestion, embedding, actually adding an analyst to your team as a way to kind of, I guess you could say inspire
Yeah.
or serve as a catalyst for that relationship. That's a great idea.
Well,
Great idea.
it's one of those things that some finance functions have that FP&A team that goes all the way in the operations analysis, and some don't. Some don't even have strong FP&A teams. But there's always a
Right.
need for operation analysis. So if you go over to like the sales function, sales operations is in every organization. Sometimes that gets
Right.
pushed into finance, sometimes it doesn't. Marketing ops, though, from my experiences, doesn't always exist. And so that
Right.
sales ops world that we have all seen, whether it's in sales or it's in finance and an FP&A function, that needs to be created in each of the functions across the business, and particularly in something that's marketing, that's data heavy, such as marketing.
Right. It's interesting, as I, through the years, over the last 25 years, when I'd hear someone say they have a marketing ops function, and then you really dig in and you look at the capabilities they have on that team, more often than not, when they say marketing ops, they're referring to somebody that maybe is responsible for the database development. Maybe they're responsible for the tech stack and the integrations between the technology. It's not always that you find someone on the team that's actually doing analysis. It's not always that you would find somebody that's responsible for, let's say, budget and performance management. That I'm always shocked to find marketing ops not necessarily being defined consistently or invested in a way that would be
Right.
or support or help the marketer manage marketing like a business.
Hmm.
And so that feels like a gap that we should all be thinking about solving. And by the way, I've seen that in companies big and small. Uh,
Yeah, I have
And so
to.
now when I talk to marketers, tell me about your marketing ops function. Tell me about how you think about budgeting and planning and performance management. And what does that look like for you today? And is all of that information in a large database of disjointed spreadsheets and holy cow, death by
Right, right.
PowerPoint? Like, where is all this information managed and how are you leveraging it? And oh, by the way, who in your team is keeping their eye on that every day? Because, CMO can
Yeah.
find themselves pulled in a million directions. But yeah,
Absolutely.
that's
Yeah. And I mean, and a lot of times, I've seen where marketing, because of that, starts to create their own data that doesn't tie into the actual pipeline and then flow all the way into the actual P&L. So it can never really
yeah,
get connected into the budget and forecasting tools. That's a huge miss,
right.
because if it can get connected all the way from the beginning, then you know how much you need to invest on the marketing side to drive X amount of leads to then funnel into the opportunity on the top of the sales side and then convert all the way down and flow into wins. And so it's critically important to have that connected. That's why I'm big on trying to keep it inside of the FP&A function, keep pulling it together. So It's one data flow all the way through. But
Yeah.
if the marketing ops team can still create that bridge, then it doesn't matter. But if they can't, then you run into situations where it can be a mess.
So, in the spirit of that, what are the metrics when you think about the financial performance metrics of the business? What are the metrics you wish a marketer would get passionate about and work hard to connect the dots between their typical marketing metrics
Yeah.
and those that are important to the
Yeah.
business?
I think it's really leads just getting converted into really qualified opportunities that are getting handed to the sales team. It's
Yeah.
probably the simplest one. That if you can continue to connect that dot and move it upstream a little bit, where you know that now you take the leads and splitter them out where they're coming from and start to look at conversion rates. But everything needs to be, how do you get that lead into an opportunity that a salesperson can go chase and close?
It's important to note there are a lot of passionate marketers that are starting to go down this path of death to the leads. Now, whatever that engagement is, whatever the prospect, however they're interested, whatever level of engagement they're showing, at some point in time, every marketer is asking someone in sales to effectively pursue whatever that engagement is. Whatever you want to call it, there's a
Mhm.
handoff. And in that handoff, if that handoff made sense to pursue, and if the salesperson knew how to effectively pursue whatever that engagement is, the next right thing is you will see an opportunity gets created. And so I think what's really important to note here is whatever you call it, you need to care as a marketer that that does lead to creating an opportunity, and that that opportunity has, or at least a sales rep is supported and enabled to have the right conversation so that more of them advance through the pipeline and lead to a closed won sale. So do not get hung up on the word lead. You have to care very much about that output, whatever you call it, and it leads to opportunities.
And I
So
don't even know, I don't even care as a CFO if it goes backwards, meaning where did the opportunity
yeah,
come from and how did we get there? If that can
yeah,
be evaluated and analyzed on a monthly basis or a weekly basis for that matter, it's fantastic. I
yeah,
remember sitting down with Dominic really early on at 2X. And he had this chart of somebody like coming in, or it ended up being a win, and he went backwards and mapped the whole thing out. And it was all the different touch points they had before they actually answered the phone for one of the people, or the inside salespeople that were calling. And it was like 10 touch points, and he had mapped the whole thing out because he'd figured out every
yeah,
data point that they had been able to hit, or we were able to track, whether it was what did they consume on the website, what did they like on LinkedIn, did they, receive some kind of a gift because we were doing a marketing campaign, and did they open up the emails? If you can figure out a way to connect all those things, and then report back,
connect the dots.
then all of a sudden it's not just about, that lead to opportunity. It's about how did we find this guy and how did we
Right.
convert him into a win at the end of the day? And what was all the data that he consumed on the way related to our specific company?
I love that you highlighted that. We continue to maintain and, monitor that. We help our customers do the same thing. And what's fascinating is that now the technology is advanced in such a way that we can actually take that final decision, understand who are all the people that contributed to that decision on the customer side, and then you can actually track back to see all the behaviors where they directly engage with you in any one of the, whether it's your own channel on your website or let's say a social media channel. And you can go all the way back to when you could actually have seen that that account was showing intent before you even knew who the people were that were doing the research and the evaluation.
Right.
It's really powerful. And that's powerful for a couple reasons, right? It certainly helps us understand, well, how do companies buy solutions to their challenges, and what role does marketing and sales play? But it is reinforcing the fact that you can't just think about marketing as having one job and that's generating leads. You could turn off marketing, and very quickly you'll find that let's say opportunities don't advance as
Yeah.
fast. There aren't more wins because of all that stuff that
Right.
marketing would have invested in to support that research and evaluation process before they talk to sales, before they even complete a form,
Yeah.
right? If you turn that funding off, you start to see the business will slow, from a revenue
Yeah.
standpoint. So that's a great time to be a marketer because of that visibility that we now
Yeah.
have.
I love
That's for
that.
sure.
I would love to be able to see that if we cut $1 today, in 9 months, it means we lose an opportunity. I think if there's a way to show that, that's like a game changer for CFOs.
What I was, we just had our annual sales kickoff meeting, and in that meeting, I had shared an example of one customer whose the account, about 3 quarters earlier had been showing significant intent around content marketing and content challenges, content production challenges. And through the course of, 2 quarters, had engaged with us in a variety of channels, consuming lots of content, all seemingly around content marketing, did not necessarily complete a web form to talk to a sales rep. And then separately, one of our, as we work with a lot of PE firms, suggested, hey, I think one of our portfolio companies is struggling in scaling their content production. Maybe you should talk with them. Sure enough, it's that same company that a couple of quarters ago had been doing research around content marketing had finally gotten to a point where they were looking for a model that could scale content without increasing costs. And so it was just amazing to see how all of these investments that we make, whether it's in our content, whether it's being findable in social media channels and communities, but also the investments we make in our partners, like helping and supporting PE firms as they support their portfolio companies, all of those investments led to a fairly significant close-won sale, and we could connect those dots. So
It's really cool. Yeah.
it really is a great time to be a marketer with this
Yes.
technology, but you got to have the analysts that actually can surface these insights in
That's
such
right.
a way that you can action them and connect the dots. Okay, so 2 final questions
Okay.
for you. One is when you think about finance, you mentioned a few times that maybe a marketer isn't always blessed with
Mhm.
the same, let's say, customer obsessed or marketing and sales friendly finance business partners. What do you wish your, finance executives knew about marketing that might change the way that they show up in those conversations?
Yeah, I
In
think
case you're listening, because I
yeah,
do think I found you because you were
right.
listening to my interview with
Yeah.
Brandon. What advice do you have for finance executives about how to kind of change the way that they work with marketing to, benefit the business?
Well, I
What
mean,
are your thoughts?
financial people love models, right? They love their long range models. They love their forecasting models. I think continuing to look at the marketing piece, not as just an expense line in the P&L in terms of the budget, the forecast, but the metrics that are above revenue that as you go up, you're generally in these models looking at sales metrics, but you have to go up another level and start to look at the marketing metrics. And you have to look at
Yeah.
where the dollars are spent and how it's waterfalling all the way down. I think that's probably the biggest learning is as a CFO, you're taught generally inside of the P&L and everything else. Then if you're more of a strategic FP&A background, or even if you're come out in the accounting firms and you move up and you start to really embrace that and maybe learn from a good CFO, then you start to go up into all the other metrics. But there's metrics, I always say they're a little bit above some of those traditional sales metrics. And those are the marketing metrics that you really need to embrace because you can model it out. Back to, when I said earlier, I think it would be really cool to know if I cut $1 in marketing spend now, how it would impact. My first thought was, how would that flow through a financial model? And I would love to have that toggle all the way at the beginning that was like an extra marketing dollar here. What does that do when I turn that knob in terms of the waterfall all the way down? And 2 years from now, what does it translate in terms of revenue growth?
I was just about to flip that example on its head by saying, well, instead of cutting
Yeah.
marketing, what if you added an extra dollar, but you got there before I did? And certainly you've given lots of great advice for the marketers that are listening. But is there any one thing you wish a marketer would knew or kept in mind when they approached their partnership with CFOs and the finance team?
Yeah, I think it's important almost, again, to flip that back around, which is understand that it is all about the dollars are being spent to generate revenue.
Yeah.
And so you have to
Yeah.
get that mindset into your head and into every conversation, which is we're doing this because we're trying to generate growth. And that growth is coming through these mechanisms. And this is the waterfall. And here's the real cost of associated with generating a win. And we can continue to drive that price down and increase the amount of volume up, which is, the magic everybody wants. But if you can have that mindset as a marketer, connect the dots all the way back through to the CFO, I think, the sky's the limit in terms of the impact you can have on the organization.
That's great advice. Thank you. Thank you for the time
Yeah, of
today,
course.
all the insightful nuggets, and I hope you'll have another conversation with us in the future.
Well, of course. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.